For our second Tech Talk of the day, please welcome to the stage Sean Farrell, Portfolio Director, Passenger Processing and Self-Service at SITA.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hands up who knows who SITA is? Not many of you, which is very surprising. So we are basically a global air transportation industry technology company, which is actually owned by the majority of the world's airlines as a cooperative, with about 500 members. And we operate globally. A lot of the infrastructure that you see at the airports and a lot of the systems used behind the scenes by the airlines. So for example, when you travel back to Schiphol Airport today or tomorrow, most of the IT infrastructure you see there is actually owned and operated by SITA on behalf of the airlines, from the kiosks to the check-in counters to the workstations you see at boarding and so on. And we provide a whole range of business processes, services, technology and so on behind the industry. Today I'm going to be talking to you about biometrics in travel. I look after the self-service products at SITA, which means I have our boarding gates, kiosks, bag drop systems and so on, which we provide today in about 150 airports around the world. And we're seeing a real groundswell of interest in the use of biometrics for passenger processing. And I think it's really quite unprecedented how quickly this is catching on. We do a global industry survey year after year, and you can see that just in the last 2 years, from 2017 to 2018, the number of airlines and airports that are planning to implement biometric technology has gone up from around 25 to 27%, up to almost 3/4 of airlines and airports thinking about this technology from an implementation standpoint in the next 3 years, which is really a massive change in the industry. Now, given that biometric technology has actually been around for about 40 years, the question is, why is it happening now? Why suddenly is this technology being adopted so quickly by the industry? And a lot of it is to do with the fact that passengers are becoming more familiar with this technology. We're all using our thumbprint these days to unlock our smartphone, or if you have one of the newer Apple phones, you might be using your face. We're using biometrics to open our laptops, and we're starting to see biometrics being used in all walks of life, all different kind of use cases. And that's a lot to do with the fact that the technology itself has really come on a lot in the last few years. And it's got to the point now where it really works extremely well in the airport environment as an enabler of self-service processes. Our industry has really tried to focus a lot over the last 10, 15 years in trying to drive passengers towards self-service. It's not just about saving money on labor or trying to improve the efficiency of the airport and get more people through the processes in the same space constraints and so on. It's also to do with the fact that passengers overwhelmingly prefer self-service. They would much prefer to go to a kiosk or to use an automated process than stand in line and wait to speak to an airline agent. And this technology now has got to the point where it can automate existing self-service systems like boarding gates and work as fast and as seamlessly as just scanning a barcoded boarding pass. But with the additional benefit that you're also verifying the traveler's identity as part of that process using the biometric. If you think about identity, airlines and airports have an obligation to ensure that passengers are who they say they are. It's a very important part of the travel process because of the security issues around our industry. And airlines and airports are not equipped to do those checks. They actually rely on governments to do those checks for them. So most of the time when an airline is checking somebody's identity, they're doing it by checking that person against their government-vetted credential, like a passport or a driving license, or against a government database. That has typically been a manual process. Sometimes you see it happening 2 or 3 times as you go through the airport. And it's really an impediment that stops the industry from rolling out more and more self-service because they've got to make these manual checks. And biometrics has the power to actually automate those checks and really increase the adoption of self-service. And here you can see 2 examples of systems that we've deployed in the US, where we are sending the biometric information directly to the US government, and they're matching it against existing data that they have. So in the US government has biometric information on every traveler who's leaving the United States. They have it because if you're a US citizen, you applied for a passport. And if you're a foreigner, you've either applied for a visa, or when you arrived in the United States, you had to provide your face and fingerprint biometrics. So they've already got the data. And what we can do now is we can capture the live biometric in the airport, send it to the US government, and get a response back almost instantaneously saying that this traveler is who they say they are, and even telling the airline who that traveler is, so then the airline can automate the process. It takes us less than a second from the time that somebody stands up in front of a camera to do that automated recognition of their face with the US government systems which are located in Virginia. And then from there, we can automate the airline process. And we can do that today with about 99.5% accuracy. So the systems that you're looking at here, which are in Orlando and Logan Airport, are working with about 99.5% accuracy, and that's with children to senior people. It works for people in wheelchairs. And you know, if you went back 3 or 4 years ago and you tried to do this, you could have done it if the passenger was standing in front of the camera with a fixed facial expression, with no glasses, with no hair across their face, with perfect lighting, without smiling. Today we can do it with passengers who are looking slightly away, who are smiling, who are wearing glasses, wearing hats, gloves, earphones, and so on, and it works just as well. So really, from a technology standpoint, the technology has got to the point now where it works, and works very well for our industry. The majority of systems that you see today deployed around the world, and there are already about 20 examples of biometric passenger processing, are based on the concept that the passenger is enrolled as early in the process as you can get them. So it could be on your smartphone before you arrive at the airport. We can scan your passport information directly from the chip on your passport into your smartphone these days, and then do a live face match with the camera on your smartphone against the biometric from the passport. Or it could be when you arrive at the airport and you first touch an airline system, a check-in kiosk, or a counter. And what normally happens there is that the live biometric is verified against a government credential of some sort, and then associated with the barcoded boarding pass and the travel document. And then as you go through the rest of your process, you then just are matched based on your live face biometric, and that's enough then to automate all the airline processes behind that. So that's an example of how we can enroll people as they arrive at the airport, take them through the process, and then at the end of the day, we delete the biometric information after their flight has departed. And the question is, you know, how do we get from that scenario where you have passengers enrolling for one trip to a scenario where passengers enroll once and can travel around the world from place to place and use the same biometric credentials without having to re-enroll? So ideally, you want the passenger to be arriving at their destination, walking straight through immigration, and also being recognized using the same face biometric without stopping. So what does it take to get to that point? First of all, you know, this technology really has to be a replacement for the existing processes. It has to be on the way and not in the way. If you're just adding biometrics to the existing processes which are enabled by barcoded boarding passes, it doesn't help. It has to replace the existing processes. And it has to be done in such a way that every passenger can be processed the same way. Airlines hate exception handling. If you think about the boarding gate environment, they want every passenger to go through the same process and not have to sort out those passengers that have a biometric and those that don't, because it starts to complicate the process. And there are really 4 enablers that will make this happen. The first is collaboration between the different stakeholders in the airport. So the governments, in the form of the immigration, customs authorities, the security agencies, and the airlines and airports. As I said before, identity is really intermeshed between governments and airlines and airports. Airlines and airports rely on governments. So the most effective way to try to streamline the process at the airport is by actually having a collaboration between the different stakeholders, to the point where if you have the right collaborations, you could potentially even eliminate the immigration checkpoints at airports, because the immigration authorities would be able to rely on the checks which are being done by the airlines. And if you don't believe that this is possible, this is what the US government is aiming for. There are no outbound immigration controls in the US today, but the US government is looking for 100% biometric collection by the airlines on the outbound side as a substitute. The second thing is we need standards and recommended practices. You want to be sure that as passengers travel around the world, they're going through the same processes, the systems look the same, the processes are the same, the integration between all the different airline systems and how this biometric technology at the airports and centrally with the airline systems is all done in a consistent, standardized way. Otherwise, it becomes a big mess for the industry. The third thing you need some sort of a framework for exchanging biometric information and identity information to facilitate that cross-border movement of travelers, so you can go from one location to the next and use the same set of identity credentials no matter where you go. And when you think about that, the last thing you need the data privacy and the protection of the data, right? If you're talking about an environment where you're sharing biometric information in addition to the already very sensitive biographic information that we have in passports, then you really need to make sure that whatever mechanism is put in place to share that data is very secure. And the good news is that there's lots of people in the industry looking at how to do these sorts of things. The main program being under IATA, which is the One ID program, which is looking at all of these 4 areas. But you also have ICAO looking at the next generation of passports, which will be a digital credential that you keep on your smartphone. And you have people like the World Travel and Tourism Council, the World Economic Forum, looking at how to extend this issue of using biometrics for identity beyond the core airline processes at the airport out to other industry stakeholders like leisure, retail, hospitality, car rental, and so on. So in the future, we'll all be traveling around the world using our smartphones as our primary way of identifying ourselves. And on our smartphone, we will have our digital travel credential, which will most likely be a derivative of the e-passport issued by your government authority from your home country, and used to spawn your identity on your smartphone. And in addition, you'll have your digital right to fly, which will be derived from what we call the barcoded boarding pass today. So essentially, it will be a token of some sort that will denote that you have the right to board an aircraft. And as you travel around the world, as you fly from JFK to Heathrow Airport, you will share your credential and your identity information directly from your smartphone with all of the different relevant stakeholders at the airport that you're flying from. So the immigration authorities, the airlines, and the airport themselves. And you'll even use your smartphone to interact with the systems at the airport to do things like print out your bag tags or to open a gate. And as part of that process, you will also be able to get additional verifications of your identity claim back from the different stakeholders you interact with. So if you cross the border in the United States, you'll be able to get confirmation from the United States government that you are who you say you are, and that will also be added to your wallet on your smartphone as an additional verification of your identity credential. And this will then get added to your phone wallet, and as you travel around the world, you'll be able to then present these credentials again, including the verifications that you've received as you go through the process, and so on as you go through the travel process. So the mobile technology is really a key enabler of how we use identity in the future. Blockchain is one of the key technologies that will allow this to happen. And this is not something that is just necessarily being driven by our industry. There are people looking at this issue of using smartphone-based identity tokens, using blockchain as the mechanism to secure how that identity information is being shared across all kinds of industries. And the reason for this is that we want to solve the issue of identity, not just for travel, but also for interacting with all the other online services that you interact with today, your doctor, your healthcare provider, eBay, Amazon, when you book a ticket with an airline, and so on. And there are people like the World Wide Web Consortium through the Decentralized Identity Foundation looking at this problem of how to create a blockchain infrastructure for securing how identity information is shared for all those different use cases, not just travel. And we'll be able to leverage that within our industry. Looking at how the promise of this in terms of the self-service processes, the idea for the industry is to get to the point where going through the airport is as walk-through and seamless as it can possibly be. And there are 2 examples here. The one on the left is Dubai Airport, which is a walk-through tunnel for immigration enabled by iris technology. And the one on the right is more of a traditional, if you like, an e-gate style process, which is being enabled by LiDAR technology, which is really taking care of the separation of passengers and making sure that only one person goes through the gate at a time. The problem with the model on the left is that actually it still has to be manned, because if you get somebody that is failing the identity match or doesn't have the right to go through the security checkpoint, then somebody has to intervene. And if somebody has to intervene, they can be very easily overwhelmed if several people at the same time get rejected. So I think that actually these biometric processes at the airport built into self-service systems will look much more like the situation on the right in the future, where you'll still have barriers, but those barriers will open in front of you as you're being recognized as you walk up to them, and you'll be able to go through, but the barrier will close if there's an issue which prevents you from going forward, like your identity is not being matched. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.